the murdered body of 18-year-old Deanna Styres was found dumped in a wooded area in Levy County, Florida, the day after Christmas in 2012. She had failed to return home on Christmas Eve after going out to a bar where she befriended 41-year-old Byron Buchanan and 35-year-old Crystal Brinson. Investigators later learned that the three had left the bar together and continued to party at several private residences. Styres had an extremely high amount of morphine in her body at the time of her death, leading to suspicions that someone had forcefully overdosed her. Investigators discovered that a man named Kevin Shields had used her credit card and paid a visit to his home, where he explained that Buchanan and Brinson had showed up at his residence with Styres' body in the trunk of their car. The information Shields provided led to another person of interest who provided even more incriminating details about the crime. Buchanan and Brinson were also connected to Styres' death through DNA evidence, resulting in their arrest on suspicion of murder. Prosecutors accused the couple of killing Styres after they caught her stealing $1,800 worth of methamphetamine. They supported their argument by pointing out inconsistencies and conflicting details in the stories Buchanan gave during questioning. The defense claimed that Buchanan and Brinson injected Styres with morphine in an attempt to calm her down during a drug-fueled rage and that the overdose was accidental. Brinson ultimately pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a 12-year prison sentence and was released in 2023 after serving her time. Buchanan took his case to trial and was found guilty of second-degree murder, landing him a life sentence without parole. Shields and the other witness who provided information about the crime avoided criminal charges in exchange for their cooperation in the case. Number 15. Alex Felhofer and Craig Lang. Former soldiers Craig Lang and Alex Felhofer met in 2017 after deserting the US Army and fleeing to Ukraine, where they fought against Russian forces with far-right extremist militant groups. The men who served alongside the pair would later tell BuzzFeed that they had a deeply disturbing fascination with violence and a desire to kill for the sheer thrill of it. Later that year, Lang and Felhofer went on a global search for wars to fight in. By 2018, they had been deported to the US after trying to enter South Sudan to fight with rebels. In April of 2018, a Florida couple in their 50s named Danny and Deanna Lorenzo were shot dead in their pickup truck in Estero after responding to an online ad about some guns for sale. The Lorenzos, who often made money by reselling weapons, had agreed to pay $3,000 cash for the firearms and were ambushed by dozens of gunshots upon arriving at the scene. Investigators eventually traced the crime to Felhofer and Lang, who were accused of robbing and killing to fund their travel to Venezuela, where they planned to fight the country's government. In 2019, the pair were indicted on a slew of federal charges, including violating the Neutrality Act, conspiracy to kill, kidnap, or maim persons in a foreign country, conspiracy to interfere with commerce by robbery, and conspiracy to discharge a firearm during and in relation to a crime of violence, interference with commerce by robbery, and use of a firearm during and in relation to a crime of violence causing death. By then, Lang had fled back to Ukraine. Felhofer was arrested in Wisconsin about a year after the double murder, while Lang spent nearly 6 years fighting his extradition to the US. In March of 2024, Felhofer was found guilty of multiple charges. He was sentenced to 2 life terms without parole. In the meantime, Lang was finally deported back to the United States and is currently awaiting trial from behind bars in Florida. Number 14. Edward Eddie Gallagher. In September of 2018, US Navy SEAL Edward Eddie Gallagher was charged with numerous offenses under the Uniform Code of Military Justice for his alleged misconduct during a deployment to Iraq the previous year. He was accused of fatally stabbing an injured teenage ISIS fighter and posing for photos with the corpse, which he sent to at least one friend. According to prosecutors, Gallagher had also become reckless and bloodthirsty in his sniper work, firing his gun far more often than other snipers and randomly shooting at buildings. Witnesses reported seeing him fatally shoot several civilians for no reason, including an elderly man, and he allegedly bragged to his fellow service members about the number of people he killed. Additionally, Gallagher was accused of threatening to kill any fellow SEALs who ratted on him. The charges were difficult to prosecute due to the Navy's year-long delay in launching a formal investigation, and because the case was based largely on eyewitness testimony rather than hard evidence. Gallagher maintained his innocence, dismissing incriminating text messages as dark humor, while another SEAL admitted to killing the teenage captive after being granted immunity, despite having never made this confession during his conversations with investigators. In 2019, Gallagher was found guilty of wrongfully posing for an unofficial picture with a human casualty. He was acquitted of all other charges and sentenced to time served, and was also demoted. His demotion was reversed by President Trump the following month, and he retired from the Navy weeks later with full honors, pension, and medical benefits. Gallagher has been extremely vocal about his anger toward the military over the handling of his case, making it clear that he does not believe he did anything wrong and that there's no convincing him otherwise. Number 13. Michelle Panida. Known by the street name La Chalet, 22-year-old female Michelle Angelica Panida headed an extremely violent gang that dismembered the bodies of its victims and offered their hearts to the La Santa Muerte, a female deity who represents the personification of death. The unit operated as a cell of the Artistas Asesinos gang and is believed to be responsible for more than 20 dismemberment killings in Juarez, where victims' mutilated bodies were often dumped in the street. In 2023, American authorities announced that they were searching for Panida, who was wanted for running a drug-dealing operation out of the border city and was suspected of crossing illegally into the US on several occasions. In February of 2024, she was apprehended in a hotel room in El Paso, where law enforcement found guns, knives, machetes, and a collection of drugs including fentanyl, cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and Xanax. Border agents handed Panida over to authorities in Chihuahua, where she's accused of participating in the double murder of a couple and the murder of a man whose body parts were found in garbage bags throughout Juarez. These types of killings are not unusual in cartel-infested regions, where devotion to the Santa Muerte has grown increasingly popular in recent years. The Catholic Church has condemned the worship of the folk saint as demonic heresy, but she remains a staple of narco culture among cartel members who believe she protects them from harm while they commit crimes. Number 12. Carlos Portillo. When a resident near the Oak Creek apartment complex in San Antonio, Texas, awoke early one morning in January of 2024 to what sounded like a gunshot and a man yelling angrily, she assumed it was a firework and a drunk person rambling. But it quickly became clear that something was very wrong to witnesses who actually caught a glimpse of the man who was seen wandering around outside covered in blood. Later identified as 44-year-old Carlos Portillo, he was behaving erratically, causing one onlooker to worry that he was going to walk into oncoming traffic. Concerned bystanders dialed 911 and police were summoned to the scene, where they found Carlos screaming on the sidewalk. He told responding officers that his wife, 51-year-old Sheila Jo Portillo Hanks, had been shot inside the couple's apartment. The cops found Sheila Jo dead from a gunshot wound inside the residence and arrested Carlos on suspicion of her murder. Sheila Jo had moved to Texas from Alaska in 2022 to be with Carlos, who she had been pen pals with while he was serving prison time on drug charges. Two of her friends, Amanda Hollins and Deborah Littlefield, told local news station KENS5 that the relationship was volatile and that they offered to help her leave Carlos. Following Sheila's death, Hollins and Littlefield said that they wished they had been able to save their friend and that they hoped to see Carlos brought to justice. According to the most recent available updates on the case, he remained held in custody with bond set at $275,000. Number 11. Tiama Soab. In what detectives described as a classic femicide, the murdered body of a 22-year-old French woman named Oriane Nathalie Leisner was found inside an abandoned church in Italy's Aosta Valley in April of 2024. She was discovered in a fetal position with 3 gunshots to her neck and abdomen and had been stabbed multiple times with a camping knife. Oddly, there were no signs of a struggle having taken place, and it appeared as though some of the victim's blood had been scraped off the floor. Police believe Leisner was killed by her 21-year-old Egyptian-Italian boyfriend, Tiama Soab, who lived in Grenoble, France, and was banned from going near her due to an ongoing domestic violence case. The pair may have been searching for a rumored haunted house as part of a TikTok challenge, according to a law enforcement spokesperson who told CNN that Leisner informed her family of the plans before leaving for Italy. She and Soab had reportedly asked a local resident in a nearby town if they knew of any abandoned villages in the area. Located in the deserted town of Equilavaz, the church where Leisner's body was found is not popular among tourists and is only known to some local residents. A TikTok spokesperson denied that the tragedy was connected to the app in any way, telling Business Insider that there's no evidence to suggest that this was the case. Another theory based on the lack of evidence of a struggle suggests that Leisner was killed as a sacrifice or in a so-called consented murder. A witness who recalled seeing Soab and Leisner shortly before the murder said that the couple were dressed in all black, like vampires or goths, and that Leisner looked emaciated and pale, like a walking corpse. Several food items were found near her body, including a bag of pink marshmallows, but there was no cell phone or identifying documents at the scene. Soab was arrested in Lyon, France, during a manhunt following the discovery of Leisner's body. In May of 2024, he was convicted in the domestic violence case in France, while awaiting extradition to Italy, where he'll be tried for murder. The outcome of the case remains to be seen. Number 10. Cynthia Khalil. 37-year-old Cynthia Khalil of Meade, Washington, had her first major run-in with the law in 2015 when she was charged with murdering her nephew. She was acquitted of the charge in 2018 and now stands accused of killing her ex-boyfriend, 40-year-old Justin Daniel, who was shot and stabbed to death in April of 2024. At the time of Daniel's death, the previously engaged couple was entangled in a contentious legal battle over custody of their young daughter. In November of 2023, Daniel had sought an anti-harassment order against Khalil, claiming that she had kept their daughter from him for 2 months and accusing her of tracking his vehicle with AirTag devices. The judge granted the order and awarded Daniel primary custody of the child. Under the order, Khalil was banned from contacting Daniel about anything other than their daughter. On the morning of the murder, Daniel called police to report Khalil for violating the order. Officers arrived to find him dead from 3 gunshots and dozens of stab wounds, leading to Khalil's arrest on suspicion of first-degree murder, burglary, and violating a protective order. According to law enforcement, the accused killer forced her way into Daniel's home at 2 in the morning. The victim's teenage daughter overheard her father telling someone to leave, followed by several loud bangs. She told investigators that Daniel screamed for help and tried running upstairs before he died. After fleeing the scene, Khalil showed up at her stepfather's house covered in blood. She showered, changed her clothes, and went to the hospital where she was treated for cuts to her thumb and torso. Deputies caught up with her at the emergency room, where she refused to answer any questions and immediately requested an attorney. Khalil remains held without bond at the Spokane County Jail as she awaits trial, which is scheduled to begin in late August. Number 9. Isaac Gonzalez and Johnny Berier. 25-year-old Novita Brazil was sitting at a desk and working on her computer at an Airbnb in San Antonio, Texas, one night in October of 2022, when she was murdered in a drive-by shooting. The killers fired over 100 bullets at the residents as they drove past in a stolen car, drawing the attention of nearby Bexar County deputies. Law enforcement arrived at the scene to find Brazil dead and another woman suffering from non-fatal gunshot wounds. In the meantime, deputies followed the shooter's speeding vehicle and apprehended the teenage suspects after a brief pursuit. 5 individuals were charged in connection with the shooting, including Isaac Gonzalez and Johnny Berier, who were charged with murder and aggravated assault. In January of 2024, Gonzalez pleaded guilty to both charges. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Berier's case appears to be ongoing, while the current status of the rest of the defendants' cases is unclear. Number 8. Sadik Shabaz. 22-year-old Jaleesa Lockett and her sister, 24-year-old Amaya Lockett, were mercilessly gunned down outside a Dallas, Texas apartment complex in a 3 a.m. shooting in May of 2024. Police arrived at the scene to find the women dead and Amaya's boyfriend, Moises Flores, suffering from 2 gunshot wounds. Flores identified Jaleesa's boyfriend of several months, 25-year-old Sadik Shabaz, as the shooter. He told police that the 2 couples were hanging out at the sisters' shared apartment when he and Amaya overheard gunshots from a bedroom where Jaleesa and Shabaz were arguing. Shabaz allegedly shot Amaya when she headed toward the bedroom to check on Jaleesa. He then turned the gun on Flores, who barricaded himself inside a bedroom and dialed 911. By the time police arrived, Shabaz had fled the scene. He was later captured in Fort Worth and reportedly admitted to shooting the victims, but claimed that he did not mean to kill them. The accused killer is facing a capital murder charge and is currently detained at the Dallas County Jail with bail set at $3 million. Number 7. Jeffrey Conroy. A racist teenager in Long Island, New York, was looking for blood in November of 2008 when he murdered a Hispanic man for no reason other than the color of the victim's skin. Jeffrey Conroy and his friends reportedly made a pastime out of targeting minorities with hateful behavior in the months leading up to the death of 37-year-old Ecuadorian immigrant Marcelo Lucero, who was viciously stabbed to death in Pachogue. Following Lucero's murder, Conroy and 6 other high schoolers were charged for their alleged roles in the unprovoked attack. Notoriously nicknamed the Pachogue 7, the group taunted the victim, who had just gone out to dinner with a friend prior to his death. As the accused stabber, Conroy faced the most serious charges, including first-degree manslaughter as a hate crime, attempted assault as a hate crime, gang assault, and conspiracy. He signed a 5-page confession admitting that he had stabbed Lucero but pleaded not guilty and denied it in court, despite his DNA being found on the murder weapon. By the time Conroy's trial began in April of 2010, 4 of his co-defendants had pleaded guilty to gang assault and agreed to testify against him in exchange for leniency. He chose to move forward with the case instead of trying to negotiate a plea agreement, despite the mounting evidence against him. Prosecutors argued that Conroy's prejudiced beliefs were apparent not only in his behavior, but by the swastika tattoo on his thigh. The state used this and other evidence in their efforts to prove that Conroy was a dedicated white supremacist. Meanwhile, the defense played the tattoo off as the result of a childish dare between friends, claiming that their client was not the devoted racist that the prosecution made him out to be. A jury found Conroy guilty as charged, and he was sentenced to the 25-year maximum for his crime. He'll become eligible for parole in 2030 after serving 20 years of his term. Number 6. Andrew Williamson. In early November of 2023, a woman was violently attacked inside her own residence in Northampton, England, where 41-year-old Andrew Williamson choked her, punched her repeatedly, ripped out a clump of her hair, stabbed her sofa, and destroyed her phone to prevent her from calling for help. The victim's hair was yanked with such force that she was partially scalped, and she suffered other lasting injuries which one detective described as some of the worst they had seen throughout their career in law enforcement. She also suffered emotional trauma from Williamson's prolonged violence and threats, which had left her feeling like she would never escape his abuse. Williamson fled the scene before police arrived on the day of the attack and was apprehended on a warrant 2 months later. In January of 2024, he pleaded guilty to assault, occasioning actual bodily harm 8 months later, and was sentenced to 27 months in prison. The judge also imposed a 5-year restraining order banning him from contacting or going near the victim. Number 5. Phillip Collins. 59-year-old James Higgins Jr. was found murdered in his Gulfport, Mississippi home by his daughter in November of 2021. He had been stabbed to death with a kitchen knife 2 days earlier, after he was last seen in the company of 50-year-old Philip Latrell Collins, who was arrested 2 days after the discovery of Higgins's body. Collins had lied to friends and neighbors about Higgins's whereabouts after they began noticing his absence. He told one person that Higgins was on vacation, while claiming to another concerned community member that Higgins was inside the house sleeping. During questioning, Collins admitted to stabbing his friend in a drunken rage during an early morning argument and leaving the house without calling for help. After fleeing the scene, he hid his bloody clothes and the murder weapon in a storm drain. Collins claimed that he had acted in self-defense, but the evidence proved otherwise. He pleaded guilty to murder in 2024 and was sentenced to life without parole. Number 4. Morris Sashington. 40-year-old Quincy Kemp of Pritchard, Alabama, would have never harmed another person, according to his family, but his non-violent demeanor went unreciprocated by his girlfriend's ex-husband, who shot him dead in cold blood on Christmas Eve in 2021. Morris Sashington entered Sasha Avery's home when no one was there and lay in wait for her to return. He opened fire on Avery and Kemp in a fit of jealous rage when they came home, killing Kemp at the scene. Sasha was also shot and survived her injuries. By the time emergency responders arrived, Washington had fled the scene. He remained on the run for several months until May of 2022, when he was captured in Nevada and detained without bail until his trial. In May of 2024, a jury found Sashington guilty of capital murder and attempted murder, landing him 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Number 3. Somaya Jones. Chaos descended upon the small, sleepy city of Kosciuszko, Mississippi, on an otherwise ordinary Thursday afternoon in August of 2024, when police were dispatched to a Marathon gas station in response to a reported shooting. 31-year-old Marquarius Jones had been struck by a bullet, and authorities believe that the culprit was none other than his 26-year-old wife, Somaya Jones. Marquarius died at a nearby hospital, and Somaya was arrested on suspicion of murder. Investigators have released few details about what they believe led up to the incident, but news reports revealed that recent Facebook posts hinted at problems between the couple. Somaya is accused of shooting Marquarius in a fit of rage and reportedly remains behind bars, with bail set at $1 million as she awaits her next court date. Today's topic was requested by Deacus7295 and Prodigal1970. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Tiara Ortega. A California mom named Tiara Ortega committed the unthinkable in February of 2019 when she killed her own daughter, Eslyn, inside her upland apartment and threw her son, Jericho, from the second-story unit onto the ground below. As police descended upon the scene, 24-year-old Ortega jumped off her balcony. She sustained facial injuries, while Jericho survived with a broken foot. Emergency responders found Eslin's body inside the residence and arrested Ortega on suspicion of murder and abuse causing death. More than 5 years later, she remains held without bond at the San Bernardino County Jail amid the ongoing case. If you haven't gotten your daily dose of They Will Kill You, then stick around till after number 1, because we've got When Being Disobedient Goes Wrong coming right up for you if you haven't seen it yet. Number 1. Drunk driver stabs policeman in a shocking video that was captured inside a Russian police cruiser in 2015. A drunk driver could be seen stabbing an officer to death in the country's Altai Krai region, captured in the village of Karlovo. The footage showed the 38-year-old suspect brandishing a large kitchen knife while sitting in the back seat of the vehicle. He repeatedly plunged the blade into 34-year-old officer Alexander Lyamkin's body as the cop tried desperately to fight off his attacker. The man also stabbed Lyamkin's partner, who survived his injuries. Lyamkin eventually mustered the strength to open the door and exit the car and attempted to find help, but collapsed on the ground after walking a short distance. The other officer fought to hold the car's back door shut while the suspect attempted to open it. Backup soon arrived and the killer was charged with murder. He was reportedly angry because he worked as a truck driver and stood to lose his job due to the drunk driving charge. But he didn't help matters by committing an even worse crime and was facing 12 to 15 years behind bars for his actions. The outcome of the case is unclear. At about 5:15 a.m. on October the 16th of 2022, the police in Struthers, Ohio, pulled over a vehicle that had been spotted driving erratically down Youngstown Poland Road, almost mounting the curb several times. The police report also detailed that one of the car's headlights was disabled at the time. After the traffic stop was initiated, the driver, 31-year-old Miranda Fairchild, began shouting at the officer as he approached. The policeman informed Fairchild of why she'd been stopped, but she continued yelling at him, eventually punching him in the chest through the open car window. Backup officers subsequently arrived at the scene, but as they attempted to take the unruly motorist into custody, she continued to resist. According to the police, Fairchild kicked one of the officers in the groin before she was finally restrained in the back of the patrol car. She was then driven to Mahoning County Jail, where she was booked on charges of felony assault on a police officer, resisting arrest, and driving with a suspended or revoked license. Number 6. Michelle English and Lucretia Bruno. On November the 24th of 2021, Florida women Michelle English and Lucretia Bruno went on a bar-hopping excursion that ultimately resulted in the death of an innocent man. The two friends reportedly started drinking at Bruland's Bar and Billiards in Lakeland shortly after 4 p.m. From there, the pair drove separately to Lucky's Bar, where Bruno at one point drunkenly fell off her chair. She then stumbled out the door and, despite being exceedingly intoxicated, got back behind the wheel of her vehicle. At about 7:40 p.m., Bruno drove to a Wawa convenience store to purchase a sandwich, but the store clerk, who took note of her impaired state, tried taking away her car keys to prevent her from driving drunk. The woman snatched the keys before they could be confiscated, but then proceeded to leave them in the store's bathroom while she sat in her car. Another customer found them and gave them to the clerk, who subsequently contacted the police about Bruno. While the latter was obviously intoxicated when officers interacted with her, she wasn't in possession of her car keys, so they were unable to arrest her for DUI. Shortly thereafter, English arrived at the Wawa to pick up her friend. The police instructed her to drive Bruno home and told the clerk not to release her keys until the following day. Officers subsequently watched English drive away with Bruno in the passenger seat, at which point they left, believing the situation to be resolved. However, a short time later, English returned to the Wawa to retrieve Bruno's car keys. The clerk relinquished the keys, thinking she simply needed them to move her friend's car. Instead, English handed the keys back over to Bruno, who, despite her impaired state, got back into her vehicle and drove away. Less than 10 minutes later, Bruno was involved in a crash on Interstate 4. The 47-year-old sideswiped a truck that was pulled over to the shoulder, consequently killing a man from holiday. After the police caught up with her and finally took her into custody. Her blood alcohol level was determined to be nearly 3 times the legal driving limit in Florida. Bruno was charged with DUI manslaughter, DUI, and 2 counts of DUI with property damage. English, meanwhile, was also arrested for openly flouting law enforcement's order not to allow her friend to drive until she sobered up. Number 5. Titus Low. In December of 2021, a Singaporean OnlyFans star was detained by police after an explicit video of him was found on his 12-year-old niece's phone. He was charged with breaking the country's obscenity laws, which outlawed the sale and production of adult films and other explicit materials. 22-year-old Titus Low had joined the site, famous for its adult content, back in April of that same year, and prior to his arrest, had amassed over 3,000, mostly male, paid subscribers. However, following his run-in with the law, Low was ordered by the authorities to remain off the explicit content creation platform. In October of 2022, it was reported that Low had been taken back into police custody for allegedly violating the order to stay off OnlyFans. He was charged with breaching a police order, as well as another count of transmitting obscene material, to which he pleaded guilty. Low admitted to making repeated attempts to regain access to his OnlyFans account because he felt obligated to continue providing content for his paying subscribers. The young man was consequently jailed for 3 weeks. Number 4. Danny Presti. In 2020, New York City man Danny Presti, the co-owner of Mac's Public House in Staten Island, got into a contentious feud with city officials over COVID-19 restrictions that precluded establishments such as his from resuming service. Early on December the 6th, NYPD officers were sent to Presti's bar to arrest him for serving customers in direct violation of city and state closure orders. Instead of complying with law enforcement, however, the man tried to simply leave the scene in his vehicle, but after doing so ran over an officer, then continued driving for about 100 yards while the policeman was still hanging on the hood. The 34-year-old pub owner eventually came to a stop, at which point he was arrested on charges that included third-degree assault, reckless driving, menacing, and resisting arrest. Leading up to the incident, Presti had been clashing with New York authorities over their attempts to shut his business down amid spiking COVID-19 rates. In the area where Mac's Public House was located, a week before the man's violent encounter with law enforcement, his tavern had been the site of protests after he was arrested for violating coronavirus restrictions and obstructing governmental administration. With the bar's owner in custody, officials ordered that it remain closed to the public and even stationed officers outside to make sure the front door was locked. The establishment persisted in its defiance of the law, however, allegedly directing patrons to a building next door through which they were able to access the bar, leading to the events that culminated in Presti's second arrest. Number 3. Tanad Dal. In April of 2021, reports surfaced regarding a contentious traffic stop that turned violent one night on the streets of Missoula, Montana. According to court documents, local police officers observed a pickup truck driving erratically around the parking lot next to the Missoula Fire Science Lab. An officer present at the scene that night reported seeing the vehicle repeatedly traveling in circles at a high rate of speed. Law enforcement subsequently tried to initiate the traffic stop at about 2:30 a.m., but the motorist initially refused to comply. The truck then failed to yield the right-of-way and continued to swerve in and out of the painted lanes before finally slowing to a stop. Officers were then able to make contact with the driver, who was identified as 33-year-old Tanad Dal. The latter reportedly exhibited obvious signs of intoxication, prompting the police to investigate the possibility that she'd been driving under the influence. While searching Dal's vehicle, officers came upon 3 open beer bottles in the passenger seat and center floorboard. Following this discovery, the police told the woman she was being placed under arrest, at which point she became uncooperative. She resisted the officers as they attempted to handcuff her and wasn't successfully put into the back of the squad car until the arrival of backup officers to assist. Even after she'd been taken into custody, Dal continued to resist, and at one point she allegedly kicked at law enforcement and struck an officer several times. She then lunged forward in an attempt to escape, to which the police responded by laying her down backwards in the vehicle. Dal's defiance wasn't done, however, as she subsequently kicked an officer in the groin before finally being restrained sufficiently. She was taken to St. Patrick's Hospital for an evaluation. Her criminal charges stemming from the incident included felony assault on a peace officer and driving under the influence. Number 2. Michael Heath Buchanan. In the afternoon of February the 7th of 2019, Florida police were called to a home on Fieldbrook Way in the village of Fernandina, where a man was found to be in violation of a protection order. The suspect, identified as 60-year-old Michael Heath Buchanan, had previously been arrested for a New Year's Eve attack on his wife, which landed her in the hospital. The woman had reportedly been talking on the phone with a friend from out of state when Buchanan suddenly became aggravated and aggressively grabbed her by the neck. She fled to the back patio, where she called the police. She was then taken to the village's regional hospital for a swollen neck. In court, Buchanan was given a permanent injunction prohibiting him from entering his and his wife's house or from making any form of contact with her. On February the 7th, the woman found her husband sleeping between a grill and sliding glass door at the home and subsequently called the police on him. He was taken back into custody for violating the court order and booked at the Sumter County Detention Center without bond. Number 1. Chris Pritchard. A woman from eastern Iowa was gunned down at her dog daycare business on the morning of October the 8th of 2022. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office was notified of the situation shortly before 8 a.m. when a 911 caller reported the shooting. Officers were subsequently dispatched to the Mississippi Ridge Kennels, located on Highway 52 in Bellevue, where they found 55-year-old Angela Pritchard dead from an apparent gunshot wound. Investigators immediately suspected the victim's estranged husband, Chris. Back in April of 2022, the couple were involved in a domestic violence incident that resulted in Chris facing criminal charges, as well as a protection order that banned him from contacting his wife. The man later violated the order by texting her, but he wasn't taken into custody until the early hours of October the 9th, the day after Angela's killing. Following his arrest, Chris allegedly admitted to confronting her at her place of work with a 20-gauge shotgun because he was upset about the no-contact order. He also confessed to fatally shooting her, then fleeing the scene. The 56-year-old man was charged with first-degree murder and first-degree robbery, both of which are categorized as felony offenses. On October the 31st, Chris pleaded not guilty during a preliminary hearing in Jackson County District Court. Later that month, the man's stepson, Joshua Close, filed a wrongful death suit against him, seeking compensation for damages related to the estate and earnings from his mother upon her death. As of the most recent updates, a date for Chris's murder trial hadn't yet been scheduled. Would you rather spend a week in jail or never be allowed to watch anything on a streaming service or on YouTube again for the rest of your life? Let us know in the comments section below.